Charleston Harbor was surveyed, said you need a new fort at the harbor entrance, and that's where Fort Sumter came in. The blueprints date from around 1825. Started building it in 1829, so it's that old. Okay, so it's, believe it or not, it's approaching obsolescence by the time the Civil War starts. Over 3/4 of it's gone. Gone forever, destroyed in the latter half of the Civil War. So you're only seeing the very bottom footprint of the old fort around you. It's missing its upper 2 levels. You would have had 3 levels. The war, 34 hours back and forth. Nobody killed either side as a result of the bombardment. But when we start the Civil War, we're still in the days of gentlemanly conduct of war, chivalrous conduct of war. So when it was apparent to the commander here, Major Robert Anderson, that it was a no-win situation, which he pretty much knew from early on. You know, they've been watching the Confederates set up these gun batteries on this island. So he knew he was vastly outnumbered, but he was fired upon. It was his duty to return fire. When a gentleman's agreement worked out the withdrawal of the U.S. Army, they marched out of here. Before they marched out of here, he requested that, and it was very important that he leave with honor. So he was granted the request to fire a 100-gun salute to the U.S. flag before taking it down. So you can imagine the men here that have been through a very rough time over the last 34 hours, but we're going to do the final gun salute and then we're going to march out. And the band would be playing as they march out, so the band was good for something after all. On the 47th shot, a gun accident killed one of his privates, and his name was Daniel Howe. Spelled H-O-U-G-H, pronounced Huff in Boston, but Howe down here. So he's your first casualty of the Civil War, not of the bombardment, because of the gun accident during this retreat salute. So after that, you can imagine that they didn't get to 100, a few more 50, and out they marched. So they want Morris Island also as a platform to launch a siege against Charleston, because in April of 1862, the U.S. Army threw a lot of manpower at Charleston, and Charleston spit it back at them. Now you've got these guns where you could commence a long-term siege against the city. You could hit everything in the harbor and even the lower part of the city. 3 months of bloody fighting to capture this island out here in the summer of 1863. The Confederates knew that if this island falls, that's the linchpin to Charleston Harbor. It's going to be the beginning of the end for them. So that's why they were fighting tooth and nail out here. They kind of underestimated the tenacity of the people here. not so easy to give up. And Fort Sumter, folks, was important symbolically to the South, because this is where the fight for Southern independence began. It would be terribly detrimental to Southern morale if word got out that Fort Sumter had fallen to Yankees. So there was a fight to the last man order to keep the Confederate flag flying over this fort. Well, this old fort with its 1820s design, thick outer walls, hey, that's good if you have a cannon on a ship that's going to fire a round cannonball that's going to hit the outer wall, the thick outer wall. Round cannonball is going to put a dent in the brick, or maybe get stuck in the brick. But now we're sending in bullet-shaped projectiles packed with gunpowder that have a fuse in the nose. So when they come in, they hit and then explode, blowing out huge chunks of the wall. Remember, Fort Sumter used to be 50 feet tall. So once the siege starts, it's a big target, you know. Sometimes hitting this place 500 times a day between sunup and sundown. It didn't take long for the upper part of the fort to be so riddled with holes that it started to collapse downward. Even as the fort was being destroyed, the Confederates maintained almost 400 soldiers and slave laborers out here. Because right behind you is kind of the key to how they survived. The bottom set of gun rooms got buried under all the falling rubble. So this turned into a perfect tunnel bunker system all the way around. So they're down under the rubble pile as the place is getting shelled during the day, come out at night, take that rubble, throw it up, heap it higher and higher. So after a while, all you saw at Fort Sumter was a big pentagon-shaped rubble pile. You didn't see any part of the fort. And that's what survives today. So after the war, when all the rubble was cleared out, the Army was surprised that the bottom part survived. So they just cropped off the wall at the level you see today and let it go. Sherman knows the war's coming to an end. He's not going to dawdle anywhere. He's not going to stop in Charleston, a city that he knew well from being a junior officer over at Fort Moultrie in the, say, 15 years before the Civil War started. So he knew Charleston like the back of his hand. But he's not going to stop here to be the grand occupier. He wants to get through the Carolinas, up into Virginia, link up with U.S. Grant, go after General Lee, bring the war to a close. But he's going to help bring the war to a close. Especially with some of the old timers, you gotta choose your words delicately when you talk about the Civil War, especially the end of the Civil War. And when you talk about the end of the Civil War, never use the S word. And the S word is surrender. Or Sherman, but surrender. Surrender, because, and you'll see it on some of the monuments around town when referring to the Confederacy without knowing defeat or surrender. The proper term is an evacuation. Okay? So it is, you know, some people say, well, that's a play of words, but in reality, there was no surrender. Confederates pulled out, lived to fight another day, just say they advanced in the other direction, and that brought the Civil War to a close.